Hello everybody, Sebastian Quintanilla here with another Age of Empires 4 interview, and of course this is part of a series of interviews that I'm doing ahead of the game's release and ahead of Genesis, the first major tournament for the title, and I'm gathering around a bunch of people from the Age of Empires 2 scene, Age of Empires 3 scene, StarCraft 2 scene, pretty much anybody who's notable or has some experience being a professional player. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it.
So my name is Isaac Fox. My ID is PandaBearMe. I compete in StarCraft 2 primarily from like late Heart of the Swarm to Legacy of the Void, which is the second and third expansions respectively. From I'd say about like 2016 and onwards is kind of when I started competing in a big way in North America. So StarCraft 2 has different circuits for every region, and I was pretty competitive in the NA region, but I never really hit quite international until eventually I stopped and I kind of backed off and went to school and stuff like that, and now I'm here.
So did you have any experience with Age of Empires from... I would imagine that pretty much everybody who I've interviewed so far told me, yeah, I played it as a kid. But in the competitive sense of the game, when was your first sort of interaction with, oh hey, people are playing this like competitively, they are getting into it?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had the experience of like, hey, I'm a kid and I'm playing Age of Empires 2. I remember my family, like my brothers and cousins, all getting together to play Age of Empires 1 and 2, and it was just like the best experience. But I think I kind of had a little bit of a hint into competitive AoE 2 when my brother would run brackets and stuff with like friends and family, and we'd kind of do stuff like that. But the first time I really experienced esports for Age of Empires 2 was much later, more when HD was coming out for Steam, and I'd look up different builds and stuff, and that's kind of when it all opened up for me.
So at that moment then, you didn't know that Age of Empires 4 was going to be a thing. You just knew that Age of Empires 2 was having a competitive side of things. Did you try it all to get into it in that competitive set? Did you join any tournaments and try to figure out while you were having your StarCraft 2 sort of career going on?
I didn't go too hard. I actually kind of looked at it as a challenge of sorts, because I really enjoyed the idea of like learning a game, especially an RTS game, kind of raw. So I had a little challenge with one of my friends who also was StarCraft 2 player to just look up like the most basic build, how to get the feudal as quickly as possible, and then like let's kind of develop the game like together and into customs to kind of have a fun time like that. So I didn't really challenge myself into like let's be tournament players way, but more of like as like a experiment of like, I wonder if we could figure out an okay strategy just isolated from the rest of the world. And I had a lot of fun with that, but I really didn't think about competing in tournaments in AoE 2, to be honest.
Was that friend by any chance Azure?
No, actually it wasn't, but we had talked a lot about AoE 2 at some point too. We're actually good friends.
Yeah, I know that you two were part of a sort of team. Like, what would you describe it, the BearMe thing? Because I noticed it, but I didn't really dig too much into it, but I wanted to know.
Like what BearMe is?
Yeah.
BearMe is... Well, BearMe was literally just part of my name, like PandaBearMe. It was just kind of a funny idea when I was thinking up a name, and then BearMe became a clan through just an interesting circumstance of there was a lot of team leagues going on, and I had a lot of friends who just weren't in an established team to play in them. And then I had talked to the owners of the teams, and I was like, or the leagues, and I was like, can I have a mercenary team? And they were like, yeah, sure, why not? And I rounded up all my friends who weren't quite in big enough teams to play in team leagues, but all wanted to, and then we formed BearMe, and it was just kind of this actually like really strong mercenary team that would go around playing team leagues and stuff, and we had a good time because it was a lot of good friends, and that's rare to see in a team. So we were kind of like a pseudo clan, and then we actually had a lot of players from Taiwan and stuff, and we kind of just had fun with that for a while, and now it's just dormant, I suppose.
Do you think that sort of structure would flourish in the Age of Empires 4 scene? Like, I know that we are really before the Age of Empire 4 scene really kickstarts, but so far, do you think that that would be like an early predecessor to the idea of like teams fully engaging with the scene, just having a few small communities, or like not communities, but like bands of people together?
Oh, totally. I mean, I don't really know how AoE 2 works with the culture, because we're just like, even though we're like such similar games in our like genre of RTS, the culture is so different. But in StarCraft 2, like team leagues are just such a big part of like how you like have friends and like operate with, and like that's the reason some teams even exist. Even to this day, people are like, oh, I want to get 4 players, and the reason I want 4 is because that's enough for a team league. And you know, it's just kind of like the thing people looked forward to for the longest time. And I think it's kind of gone more on the back foot now as the, you know, the big leagues, premier leagues are kind of like the focus. But if you could get that spark, that energy, that especially in the early days of StarCraft 2, I think that'd be a wonderful thing.
So speaking about that that experience with StarCraft 2 and the team leagues, I'm really interested to hear if you think having that experience of what I think most people would agree is a more established and a more stable sort of competitive landscape that StarCraft 2 has, do you think that gives you an advantage coming into Age of Empires 4 that maybe players from the other AoE titles might not have? It doesn't necessarily have to be like something massive, but do you feel more confident simply by coming from this sort of more mainstream stage?
I think AoE 2 is established enough to have like people who are just pretty used to playing tournaments and maybe over nerves and stuff like that. That's like the first thing that comes to mind when I think of an advantage. Maybe if it was higher prize pool, people might break, but I feel like probably shouldn't be much of a difference. I am personally like very interested in like the AoE 2 versus StarCraft 2 kind of narrative of like what's gonna happen, who's gonna be good or bad, because that was kind of a thing between Brood War players and Warcraft players when StarCraft 2 came out, and it was kind of like this thing where everyone assumed, oh, it's a StarCraft game, surely Brood War players will do very good, and then Warcraft players ended up doing very, very well, respectively, and it was just kind of one of those things where it's just whoever puts in the most time, and you know, what happens, and I think it'll be a very similar thing where a lot of people have these biases of who's going to be better or worse, and I think it's just going to be like who wants to actually invest their time into really getting good at the game, you know?
Have you talked with anybody on the Age of Empires 2 side of things? Like, have you tried to have a conversation with somebody and get to know their perspective on getting into a new title and the things that might carry over from previous Age of Empires titles that you could learn from? Or has it been mostly just radio silence and the StarCraft 2 guys keep to the StarCraft 2 and haven't tried to bridge the gap, as it were?
Well, as you mentioned about Azure, like we're good friends, and there's like a couple different people in BearMe that are actually in this tournament, so we've been pretty tight knit on like our exploration of AoE 4 and kind of talking to each other about things we like and don't like and what we think are good and bad. So I've been really communicative on that side of things within my StarCraft group, but also I've been in another group with like a kind of a mix of, I believe it's AoE 2, Age of Empires online players. I think there might be some mythology players in there too, and they're all it's kind of a group talking about just like what they think, like what is good and bad in the game, just straight up, and just what they think about it. Besides that, I've talked to some like high-level players in AoE 2, not necessarily like tournament players, but like just like fairly like strong ladder players, and just talking about the game and what they think is good and bad. I haven't really talked to them as much about like say like a perspective of like what they like, a philosophy maybe is a better word, of like what is good and bad. But I've kind of shared some thoughts, because I think sharing information is just like the most important thing when a game's so new like this. And it's definitely been interesting because everyone's kind of got their own conclusions.
Right. I was actually like, it's super interesting that you tell me that you are engaging with people in the other side of the aisle, as it were, because today I've actually interviewed Hut, Azure, Scyther, and and Nyan. Nyan is not from the StarCraft 2 scene. He's a Age of Mythology player. And they gave me very different answers on all of these, but they all pretty much agree that they haven't talked too much with people on the other RTS titles. So I was thinking maybe there's gonna be separate metas for these players, because if they are gonna just stick to engaging with each other in their custom lobbies, then things could be very interesting. But if you're talking with other people, I think that would be interesting to see as well. So do you think that's gonna end up happening, that people are gonna create metas that are largely only applicable to facing off against people from the same RTS title that they came from? Or do you think there is going to be enough mixing around of players that there's going to be like a global meta and everybody's going to be pretty much in agreement that, hey, this is the strategy for like at least the qualifiers?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Because the latter is like technically global with the closed beta and the stress test respectively. Like they were just, everyone was mixed together, and the idea of like, oh, okay, there's these region metas and they develop because everyone's on their own server makes a lot of sense when you think about it. But just because these ladders were so short of time, like what was the closed beta, like 2 weeks, and then stress test was a whole weekend. I mean, you know, how could you want any more time than that? But because of that, there's a lot of debate. I still see arguments even now about what is right and wrong over that weekend. And it's kind of funny because there's just a huge divide on who thinks what's good. And I think part of the reason why is because there wasn't a clear ranking. So like, even if I was winning every single game, I can't really prove it. There's no replay, there's no rank, there's no win rate that you can see. And I think also like RTS players are just pretty stubborn, right? So unless they see it from themselves or experience it from a personal experience, they really wouldn't believe you. Like maybe they'll take extra consideration if you're like pretty good and you've proven it in a different way, but they're gonna have to see it, right? So I think, especially because this tournament's only a week in, I think there's gonna be a lot of people who just lose instantly because they just didn't have the right idea of something.
So now that you touched on the closed beta, I want to ask you, I didn't see your name in the top 25. That might just mean that you were top 26, which is don't know, right? From the closed beta. And I figure you also played quite a bit of the open stress test, but just knowing that you play them, I don't think gives the full picture. So how much time did you invest into each of these betas? You don't necessarily have to go into too much detail, but just to get a proper idea of the level of commitment that you put into these two events, to be able to understand Age of Empires 4 at, you know, beyond a basic level and into a more competitively minded sort of skill set.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to kind of track because for the closed beta I played on Steam, and then the stress test I played on, what was it, the Microsoft something, you know, their store thing. So I know for the closed beta I had like 200 hours, and then for the stress test, I don't know, I'm guessing maybe like 50 hours or something into that. So quite a bit of time. I was particularly fond of Mongolians just because they were so different and fun, and I figured out a lot of different ways to open with them just because they can be very different. Of course, can't talk too much about that. But unfortunately, some of that didn't actually matter as much because stuff like spawning with a sheep right away, that was like a scenario that I kind of figured out, like, what do I do if I don't have a sheep for a long time? That's all long gone now. But definitely put a lot of testing into that. Who knows if it'll pay off, but I played maybe like, gosh, like 8 hours a day, and then probably actually more than that, like 10-12 hours a day for the first couple days of closed beta. I'd say maybe more like the first week, but then after that I kind of eased back just because Mongolians were really good, English were cracked, and then the other two were just kind of okay, and I was like, nah, I mean, I know how to play these, but I don't really want to play them. And then I kind of just eased back, and then stress test I went pretty hard all the way through just because Delhi and Holy Roman Empire were just so good. Or not Delhi, Abysin. So that was pretty fun.
Right, and I want to ask you about that since you put in a lot of time. I'm really wondering, how well do you think you kept up with the sort of weekend meta? that he had, because I distinctly remember the very start of this stress test, there was a lot of talk about, hey, the English are really, really good. And as time went on, that turned into, hey, the HIRE is really, really good. And it kind of developed even into the sort of stray days and the week that the open stress test ran on. So I'm kind of interested to hear, how do you, as a pro player, keep up with such a quick turnaround in ideas, in concepts, in how to play the game? Because in just a little bit of time when the game releases, that is what you're going to be having to do before the qualifier, because, you know, coming into the qualifiers with a meta that is already like 2 days old might prove deadly in those best of one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, best of one is just like the most punishing format, and especially with a situation where it's just whoever figures out the trick first, as it were, you know, just what is the easiest one thing I can do to this guy. It's pretty difficult, right? I think as it stands, like if I was gonna play any Civ, it would be English, just because they're so good. I know you're talking about HRE being very good at the end, but I think English are just like the best by far. I think as far as like the meta goes, like to me it was pretty clear like what is very good, and then it just became like what can you do to stop that, you know. For example, like Town Center really quickly is just insanely strong. Can you ram rush it? And that's kind of, from my perspective, where we left off in the stress test, where a lot of people still don't think ram rushing works versus Town Center rush. You know, do you fast expand, do you not? I think that's the most important thing, maybe more than all the civs and stuff, because I think if you have a good civ, it just allows you to do anything you want, whereas like some civs just have no rights. And that's like the more important thing, rather than like these extra perks. Like for example, like if you could just go quick Town Center with Abbasid every single game, you'd be the best civ, but I just don't think they can defend like almost anybody's ram rush, so it's just really difficult. But I think that's a big contention with a lot of people, whether you can or not, and that's going to be the determining factor.
Yeah, and don't worry, you don't have to use the formal name for the Ram Ranch. Here we accept the colloquial title.
Oh yeah. Is everybody onto the Ram Ranch already?
Yeah, everybody calls it Ram Ranch, so I'm gonna be happy casting it with that name.
All right.
So
glad we're on pace. We're on meta with this.
So, you know, you spend a lot of time playing the game and figuring out these sort of ideas. Did you spend a lot of time looking at the gameplay from other people who were, you know, I know it's hard to call who is a high-level player and who is not, but I think there were a couple of names that were propping up as highly skilled players that were really showing up with interesting strategies, or at least well-developed strategies. Did you spend a lot of time looking at those?
As far as streams and stuff, I really didn't watch too much. The streams I watched, I kind of got interesting ideas, but I didn't really see anybody who was really that high level. To be honest, I might have missed those people. I tried to talk to as many people as I knew were high level, just to see like where they were at. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't get too many ideas, to be honest. Probably the thing that stands out the most is I was watching someone play Abbasid, and they got the tech tree that like reduced all the upgrades on the first tier, and I was like, oh, I wonder what would happen if you just got all of those. And I did it, and I was like, wow, this sucks. But it was like a good idea, because that's what you got to do. You got to just test everything, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I just try to keep my mind open, my eyes open, trying to see what people are doing. But I think, especially when the game comes out, people are going to be very, very secretive and very hidden. So it won't happen for a while, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, speaking of that secrecy, let's go ahead and talk about Genesis. The first thing that I want to ask you kind of directly about it is, what position would you be happy with getting at Genesis? Because I've talked with people like Hut, people like Azur. Everybody was telling me, hey, as long as I qualify or I get a little bit of the prize money, I think I would have done a good job. Obviously, the target is always going to be getting that win, but what are your sort of realistic expectations? What is the thing that you would be happy with your own performance?
I don't even know what the cutoff is for prize money, to be honest. I didn't even look.
Top 16, I believe.
Top 16? Okay. I mean, top 16 would be fine. The way I've been thinking about this, just because the best of one, you know, I imagine I either lose first round or I get like top 4. Like, I can't imagine anywhere between that. You know when best of ones stop?
They stop on round of 32. So if you get to past 64, you start getting those best of 3.
It's like a 64-man tournament, right? So you just got to get to round 1? Or is it more than
it's
that?
up to 512, but there might be that amount of sign up. There might not be. Right now, I believe
that's like qualifier, or
that's the qualifier, because it's essentially a 512 single elimination bracket. It's just called the qualifiers up to round of 16. After the round of 16 is called the main event. So it's just a 2-stage single elimination that kind of moves on from one to the other. I don't know if they're doing reseeding after the round of 16. That is a question that I have yet to ask them, but I don't imagine they would. Anyway, so
probably a little bit because of seeds and invites, right?
Yeah, so everybody's gonna get seeded onto the bracket itself, but there are no direct invites. Yeah. So you're not getting into the main event just by being a good player on the ladder.
Well, aren't you getting it like top 10 in AoE 4 ladder?
That's for seeding. All of that is seeding. So it just means that you get a better seeding
for the qualifier.
Yeah.
I see. I misunderstood that. Honestly, I haven't read any of the rules. I don't really care.
I'm gonna plug Wikipedia because I'm a reviewer there. It's all on Wikipedia. But yeah,
it must be a nightmare to write out all those rules. It's so specific and weird. Yeah, I mean, if I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna, like I said, I'm probably gonna lose round 1, or I'll be really far. It's gonna be one of those things, because I truly believe that the better player won't win. It's just whoever finds the sick thing first. You know, like if we were all doing a tournament like this during closed beta, the first guy who picked English would have won, and it wouldn't have been anything to do with skill. You know.
So
and
here's the funny thing.
How it goes.
Have you heard of the Storrn Stress Test Cup?
I did. Yeah, it was HRE versus HRE finals.
Yeah. Why do you think English would have it on the final game?
Yeah, I don't know why there wasn't English. I think they must have couldn't click it or something, like it was banned or something like that. I think this is one of those situations. I think maybe there's a little bit of a gap, right? Like they clearly thought HRE was the best, but I remember very vividly being on a call with Scyther. I said, I wonder why they're not playing English when it's the best civ. And I've talked to Matisse, who was one of the finalists. I think he got second in that. I haven't talked to the person who won. I forgot his name already.
Striker.
What's his name? Striker? Yeah, I think he's in a chat that I'm in too, but I haven't really talked to him too much about it. But I have heard Matisse's thoughts on on English and stuff like that. I think everybody knows English is quite good, but I haven't really talked to him specifically about HRE. But I think there's specific things that they think is good and bad that's fundamentally wrong, and that's the thing, right? Is whoever is right or wrong between us two is gonna go through, and the other person's gonna lose. And that's all there is to it, because it's the best of one. You can't adapt. So it's like big bragging rights, right? Haha, I'm right. I get to go onto the tournament, and then you're just done. But maybe they know something I don't know. I don't know.
How do you...
Not sure yet.
So I was watching Grubby, and for the people that might not know Grubby is a Warcraft 3 pro player, super informed. The dude's awesome, right? But he was talking about how do you develop your own strategies, or how do you understand strategies that other people have put forth, right? And this was in the context of Warcraft 3, but I think we can translate it here. And the thing that I found interesting is that the main point that he gets across is you really should be looking at what good players are playing and seeing what works and what doesn't work at that high level, and then seeing if you can use some of that in your own gameplay, and particularly to see what works at your own skill level. So now thinking about that in Age of Empires 4, I think it's an interesting experiment, because right now we don't have a decidedly good player sort of metric. We don't know who's a good player. So how do you think about your strategies in a way that doesn't make you fall into those sort of like mental traps where you think it is a good strategy, but it might not actually be? And I know that not having the game is a big problem for that, but even once you have the game, how do you avoid those sort of fall pits when you don't have that sort of forest of knowledge to rely on?
Yeah, for sure. And it's kind of funny because you just end up with these really anecdotal evidences where it's just like, I beat this guy with this, so it must be good. And then you're like, well, actually, I don't really know how good that guy I was playing was, and he could have messed up, and I have no idea. And you go into all these problems, and it ends up being a situation where you just have to find someone that you trust is good, just because of previous experiences, with the game or something like that, and you get into a custom, and you're like, all right, do this, and then let me see if this works. And then you do it, and you just kind of have to hope that you both did it right enough that you can make a conclusion out of it, And it's honestly not too different than being a StarCraft 2 player trying to improve, because for those who don't know StarCraft 2 very well, like, Koreans absolutely dominate the scene to an oppressive level, and it's just like you watch their games and they're 2 steps ahead. And what's funny about being 2 steps ahead is if you're 1 step ahead, it makes a lot of sense. Oh, of course, this is the natural progression from what I'm doing. But if you're 2 steps ahead, you're like, wait a second, why is he doing this? This this doesn't make any sense. It'll die to the thing that the step behind him would defend, and you don't know about that step, so it's just, you're going through a loop. But with AoE, everyone's kind of at different points, and you kind of have to quickly take in information fast. So if you see a guy doing something completely bizarre, you just have to do it yourself. Or if you play versus somebody that's doing it, do what you think will beat it, and then you have to quickly just accept that as new information and roll with it. And that's a very difficult skill if you haven't tested that for yourself. And I think there's refiners and then there's innovators, and refiners are going to have a really hard time in launch, and innovators are going to have a field day,
Yeah, and so kind of related to that, for Genesis, you're saying, you're feeling that it's going to be a very volatile tournament where either, the really good players get a bad luck and end up out really early. But do you think there is a category of players like the Age of Empires 2 players, or the StarCraft 2 players, or even the Mythology guys, that you think has the best chance at locking out that, top 8, top 4 slots, maybe even win it? Do you have like a bias there towards a particular group?
Well, of course I'm a StarCraft 2 player, so I think obviously StarCraft 2 players are very good. I think Age of Empires 2 players are also very good. I have a lot of respect for them, but I think at the end of the day, it's just whoever puts in the most work. I think probably everybody has about the same tools. I think StarCraft 2 is more difficult mechanically. I don't know if that'll necessarily matter in a game like Age of Empires 4. I imagine AoE 2 players have maybe a bit more on-the-fly thinking when it comes to comps and adapting and stuff like that. I know I'm a bit weak in that regard. I think it'll just be the top players of every single game. As far as Mythology goes, though, I'm very interested to see how those players do, just because I know it's a much smaller scene. I'm maybe a little bit more interested in how somebody from that game can do well. I know you said, was it Nyan Cat Racing was a Mythology player?
Yep.
That person ranked very high, but I don't think I ever lost to him. So I'm wondering who he beats. But there must be something special that he's doing that other people don't understand, that sets himself apart from other people. I think there's probably much more Mythology players that are very good, that are doing well and stuff like that. So I think it's just one of those things where there's kind of these water, fire, earth of play styles, and sometimes they clash and sometimes they just get countered, and you can't really know why unless you've experienced them all for yourself. And it's just gonna be you're just gonna be put in the pot and see what happens,
Yeah. So looking a little bit past Genesis, regardless of the result that you might get there, and we don't know yet if there is going to be another major close after, right? But I want to know, are you thinking about committing obviously not full time with nothing to see yet, but at least the sort of commitment where, hey, I'm gonna put a good number of hours into Age of Empires 4. I'm gonna give it a really good try. I'm gonna try to be one of the best players. Is that something that you are comfortable with sort of saying and committing to? Or you're more of, you know what, this is a big tournament at the beginning of the game. I think I have a really good chance at it, so I'm just gonna shoot for the moon and see where I land. What is your sort of idea of what you're gonna be doing in Age of Empires 4 esports?
Yeah, I think I'll play it by year. I definitely went into Age of Empires 4 expecting there to be some kind of tournaments, and I was kind of invested into that idea. If there wasn't any scene at all, I don't think I'd have nearly as much fun. You know, maybe a good week of playing ladder, and then you're like, what's the point? But I think I'll go pretty hard for at least a month or two, see how it goes. If there's a decent scene for it, I'll have a lot of fun. You know, it's no fun if no one else is trying, you know. So I think it'll very much depend on how many people are playing at the top level and if people are really willing to push the ladder and stuff like that. I think having rankings will be really fun too when they have more, rather than like MMR, they're going to add leagues and stuff, I believe, like ranks at next year, I believe. It's like a little bit more delayed. But stuff like that will really spice up the game. I think that's, you know, just this raw competitive nature. That's kind of where I'm at for these kind of games.
Nice. So where can people find that raw competitive nature from you? Do you stream? Are you planning to stream the game? Are you planning to tweet about the game? What are your socials? What do you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, my Twitch is PandaBearMe. My Twitter is also PandaBearMe. I think it's PandaBearMe SC. Yeah, I think that's about right. And I think I'll maybe even post on YouTube on PandaBearMe different videos of, I guess, maybe my games and stuff like that. I kind of did guides / kind of gameplay on StarCraft 2 for a while there until I kind of gave up on it just because my internet was a little bit sketchy, kind of shaky. But I'm going to try to do my best for AoE 4 to kind of put out content and have some fun with that too. And then, yeah, we'll see where it goes from there. But I think mostly it's just going to be, you'll see me in tournaments, just trying to play as much as possible, have some fun with that. So it's going to be a lot of laddering, very boring, long ladder streams. You know, if you really want to improve and like watch those kind of things, it's going to be the best thing. But if you're expecting the next like winter StarCraft kind of person, I don't know if there's anybody like that for AoE 2, that if there's like an equivalent, but just like, you know, the noob friendly, like teaching everybody how to play and stuff. I don't know if I don't have the heart for that. I'm not that good at streaming. I'm a noob streamer, but a pro player.
All right, so thank you so much, PandaBearMe, for taking the time to talk with me. Of course, if you're here listening to us talk, you might want to see more of him, and check the description below for all the links to his socials. You can also find information about Genesis itself if you want to keep up with the tournament, Wikipedia page, and all of that fun stuff. If you want to see more of my content, of course, you can always subscribe to my channel. It's right there. And if you really like the video, I would really appreciate it if you leave a like as well as a comment. That really does help. So yeah, that's everything for now. I hope you have enjoyed it. See you around.